Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Bronx unemployment is down to 7.4%, which is vastly improved from the more than 20% it was during the height of the pandemic in 2020. On the other hand, the state comptroller recently released a report that said New York City's young men, in particular people of color, are struggling to find work, which obviously focuses directly on our workforce in the Bronx. And incredibly, at the same time, and this brings in one of the themes of tonight's show, if you talk to employers in the Bronx, they're struggling to find people to work in retail, security, skilled mechanical jobs, and more. Tonight, we have the borough president and our two top economic development officials to assess how the Bronx is doing, and mostly to find out what their vision is on how we're going to do better when it comes to small businesses and economic development. Please join me in welcoming the 14th president of the Bronx, the Honorable Vanessa Gibson. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Always nice to have you. Also, the president of the BOEDC, the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, Mr. Rob Walsh. Nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you.
And he was the interim president of the BOEDC, but now he's the executive director of BIC, the Business Initiative Corporation of New York. Mr. Rafael Roger, nice to have you, sir. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Madam Borough President, let's start with you.
Yes, okay.
Give us an assessment. How are we doing from an economic development perspective? What are we doing well? And of course, what do you look at as we look at 2023 at doing better so that we can all prosper even better than we have been?
A lot of progress. Since a year, when I took office as the 14th borough president, the greatest honor of my life, we've had a very strategic and intentional plan to really create access and opportunity to support small businesses as the foundation and fabric of our borough, but to really give them access to capital, to build generational wealth, to provide access to loans and grant opportunities and technical assistance, because we know many small businesses fought to keep their doors open during the COVID-19 pandemic. But also supporting our entrepreneurs and giving them access to creating business plans and developing their skill sets. Many entrepreneurs of color, giving them a real outlet and meeting clients where they are. And that's why having my heavy hitters in Rob Walsh and Rafael Roger leading BOEDC and BIC New York is really our efforts to make sure that we create that access and that opportunity. Because prior to COVID, we know that we had a lower unemployment rate, and during the pandemic it went back up to double digits. And a lot of credit to my predecessor, number 13, Ruben Diaz Jr., for really creating the platform that created the good paying, stable union jobs that stabilize families. And now hearing, the numbers that we're at now, between 6 and 7%, is really a testament to the work, to the collaboration, to the strategic partnerships, working with so many different organizations and employers here in the Bronx.
And so what do you hope from them? Like, what are you expecting to, and then we'll challenge them and see if they can come up with it. But what are you looking for from BOEDC and BIC to help continue to fuel this energy?
The reality is there's a lot of money that needs to be tapped into, from the federal government to the state government and to the local. Empowerment zone, working with our colleagues in Albany, working with Secretary of State Robert Rodriguez, working with Governor Kathy Hochul, tying into empowerment zone monies, developing our IBZs, our industrial business zones, and making sure that we can redevelop these areas. We can have mixed use development, both commercial, retail, housing. All of these types of development projects create jobs, but not just any job. We want to stabilize families with good paying jobs that provides a pathway to the middle class. So many residents in our borough are rent burdened. They pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. We want to change that, and slowly but surely we're making progress. When you look at all of the capital projects across the borough, from the Metro North expansion, the Hip Hop Museum, the work in Hunts Point, reimagining the Kingsbridge Armory, as well as the renovations at Orchard Beach. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We have to be intentional about our work. We have to have a plan of action with a real purpose, and working with my heavy hitters, we're going to get that done.
Mr. Walsh, let's talk about some specifics. The borough president mentioned the new Metro North stops. How do you see that playing? There was some publicity about, gee, we're concerned because it's going to bring oversaturation in some neighborhoods. It's going to change the character of some neighborhoods. How do you see that as being a positive item to move the Bronx forward from a business and development perspective?
I think you look at what has existed already, the Metro North stops that we have. You look at Yankee Stadium, what has happened around Yankee Stadium. Guess what? We have a Bronx Children's Museum that is opened across the street from there now, right? So now you look at those 4 areas and you look at where there is opportunity to grow the main streets, to grow housing, to grow new jobs. Each of those locations is so critical. And you think of the Metro Hutch Center. You know, EDC, New York City's Economic Development Corporation, is saying that they are projecting 10 million square feet of space for life sciences. The borough president says to me on a regular basis, what is our share going to be? And we have to put our foot forward. We're meeting with Andrew Kimball, the president, in a week or two, and saying, we have it here. We have the universities, we have the research centers, we have the best hospitals in the world. What is our share going to be, and how do we leverage, as the borough president said, the strengths of this borough so we are not left out?
Do you see, let's say, a Metro North stop, and then you look geographically at the areas around it and say, well, wait a minute, let's put, I don't know, a small shopping center here, or this is a place for housing? Is that how this process will work?
Yeah, and I don't think there's like a template. I think you have to look at each and every one of the areas around that and making sure that you're preserving the character of some of these places to make sure that the neighborhood that is there is not being bulldozed, if you will, but is strengthened by the access. You know, the key and critical piece to this is the fact that is now access to Midtown. If it's access to Midtown, that means jobs, as you opened up and the borough president has said.
Do you see it as people coming from, let's say, the suburbs or Westchester coming into the Bronx and building our wealth? Or is it building wealth from
I see
people of the Bronx getting a chance to get to Manhattan quicker?
I see it, you start with who our people are who live here now and how their lives are better. And then you look at what the opportunities would be created to bring additional strength to those particular places.
Mr. Roger, the borough president just talked a little bit about available government funds, specifically from the federal government. There was stimulus money that's been passed around. We could look backwards at the PPP. Did that work out? How do you see that whole panorama of using that money? And really a question is, the borough president also just talked about entrepreneurship. Are we talking about startups, or are we talking about building existing businesses and saying, well, you can now do better because we'll give you money for your awning or whatever else you need? How do you see it?
It's kind of been a combination of those things. Without the money that PPP and EIDL, the economic injury, the disaster loans were given, we would have been in real trouble around the country. So what that did was allow us to stabilize our small businesses. And be able them to keep the doors open and to keep our small business jobs there. So we didn't lose that whole sector.
So you think it's been helpful along the way so far, certainly since the pandemic hit?
Absolutely. Those small businesses are the ones that have really kept us open. When you couldn't get into a bodega because a big supermarket because the lines were long, you had your bodega. And that guy got his PPP loan, and he was able to keep his staff on. So it was the little things that happen, especially in the areas that are food deserts and where our people don't have the access that they do in other parts, where this really helps support.
And the is there going to be, I don't know if it's better to ask the borough president this, or maybe you can take a look. Who gets? How do you determine who will get? Is it an application process? And I'm asking that very specifically because there are business people and others who are saying, well, wait a minute, this sounds pretty good. I'd love to, get a grant or a loan or something that can help me either start something or build something. What's the process like?
It's funny. Here at Lehman College, there's a Small Business Development Center, which is sponsored by the Small Business Administration. In that center, and there's others in other parts, but ours is here at Lehman. They'll help you put a business plan together. They'll help you figure out your finances. They'll help you fine-tune what your idea is if you're a startup. If you're an existing business, what they'll do is look at how you're spending your money, where you're putting your money, and how you can build your business. So when you go and sit with them, they'll fine-tune your machine. So when you come and sit with Rob and I, we can say, okay, they fit here, they're ready for a microloan, they're ready for, or maybe they're ready for, like, I run BIC. BIC is a lender that helps you buy the real estate. So if you have a taxpayer, you're a restaurant, you could buy your taxpayer. So it'll streamline your services so that you're ready for us for that next step.
I think this dialogue is really important because there's a lot of people out there, in our borough who are like, well, I hear about this. How do I get started? And I'm assuming at the BOEDC and with BIC, there are going to be ways that people can get real consultation.
And we're doing more so. I mean,
more than ever.
What Rafael has done, he's tapping into a program called the Community Benefits Advantage, and basically what that does, it taps into even more money from the SBA. And we have a few friends at the SBA that have come from the Bronx. One that sat in this chair some time ago. But it's we need to turn over every stone. Rafael and I recently went down to New York City Economic Development Corporation and said, tell us the businesses that are looking to expand, maybe they're in Manhattan, maybe they're in Brooklyn, maybe they're in Queens, that they need a bigger footprint. And we could take advantage of something, Gary, that what the borough president has said to us. There's been empowerment zone money sitting around, millions of dollars for years. We need to put together creative packages for those small businesses.
What I like and what I've been expressing is the notion that people will know who you are and say, you know what, this is the direction I'm going to go. Madam Borough President, we have a new industry in the Bronx, and I know you've been supportive, and that's the cannabis industry.
Cannabis, yes.
What kind of impact can it have? Now, we know that 3 Bronx organizations received licenses in the first go-around.
Yes.
Is it going to have an impact, or is it going to help in small areas? How do you see it playing? And of course, you had that big exhibition at the post office, the old post office. What's your vision?
So legalizing marijuana is long overdue, and New York State, unfortunately, was not the first. We won't be the last, but several years ago, the state legislature codified legalizing marijuana across the state of New York. And with that came the creation of the Office of Cannabis Management. The director is a good friend of mine, Tremaine Wright, and Chris Alexander and their team. And what they started to do was put together guidelines on how we're going to regulate this industry, but also how we are going to tap into communities that have faced harsh criminal justice penalties and a system that really was not designed to be equitable. Predominantly applicants, African Americans, Latinos, people of color that faced harsh criminal justice penalties because of the usage of marijuana at the time. And we know that across the board, everyone at some point has engaged in smoking marijuana. But now that it's legal, how can we tap into it from an economic development perspective, both from an equity lens as well as a justice lens? And so with that, we were able last month to join the Bronx Community Foundation. We worked with the Wu family to host a cannabis showcase at the old Bronx GPO post office on 149th Street. And it was a weekend, Friday to Sunday, of showcase. So we had organizations like ConBus, like different organizations that came together and said, we're going to showcase what a cannabis industry looks like, what a dispensary looks like. We also had city and state agencies.
People have to learn how to do this.
People have to learn, right, in a legal way, right? So the question is, how do we take this industry that has been so behind the scenes and illegal and unlicensed and make it a licensed, legalized industry from a jobs perspective as well as entrepreneurs?
Do you see it in a similar way that alcohol and liquor, we have liquor stores everywhere, that they're regulated and it's handled properly, and do you see it in that way that we can establish a system that works like that?
Yes, we do. And we do because we know there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there that have been talking about legalizing cannabis for a very long time. And many of them have done the legwork. And what we've tried to do through the showcase is help applicants with the application process, the guidelines, understanding what it's like to even apply to become a dispensary. And we got a lot of great feedback. Now, I know that when you think about legalizing cannabis, it's a different industry from an older population versus a younger population. And so there are a lot of concerns about smoke shops that have erupted, unlicensed operators, right? The sheriff's office, Mayor Adams, and many others are involved. And so this is about a balance. It's about creating an industry that can have a positive impact from an economic development perspective, from a jobs perspective, but also making sure that we're not inundating every single community with, a smoke shop on every single block. I know many people do not want that.
Mr. Roger, let's switch to something else that, and frankly, the borough president's office said, Gary, make sure you talk about tourism.
Yes.
Make sure you talk about the opportunities in tourism.
She just
Listen, we all know about the Botanical Garden, the Bronx Zoo, Yankee Stadium. I mean, we know what's out here now. There's the Children's Museum. We have the Bronx Museum of the Arts. There are things that people from elsewhere want to go to. We'll ask both of you. We'll start with you, Mr. Roger. How do you see it playing as we get into 2023?
This is a great opportunity for our borough. As I see it, I grew up here. This is where I make my living.
You don't have to be told what's here.
This is it for me. I love Wave Hill. I love the zoo. I love going to Yankee Stadium. But everyone else should know what we have.
And the people at Arthur Avenue are going, what? What are we, chopped
I
liver?
sit on the bid, too. They're going to beat me up.
You were there last night.
But yeah, this is an opportunity for us to show the world what we have. We are a world-class destination. We have great restaurants here.
And so there's a new director of the Bronx Tourism Council.
Yes.
Right? And Mr. Walsh, you were mentioning to me that you were excited about that.
Suma Arzu Brown is fantastic. The borough president sat with her, and I sat there in excitement because she brings an energy. And Rafael talked about the big signature attractions that we have. What Suma talks about often is our neighborhoods, our main streets, our galleries, our coffee shops, our restaurants, the entrepreneurs that are lifting places like Mott Haven that are.
Maybe I'm at fault because I mentioned Arthur Avenue that everybody knows about, but you know how many neighborhoods have great restaurants?
Absolutely.
This is what we're going to do.
I'm just curious. Do you see the outdoor dining thing as a good thing? I mean, I like to sit outside.
I do.
When the weather's nice. But of course it affects parking, it affects neighborhoods, it affects noise.
I do see it. I see it
yes, a quick yes.
Yes,
Borough
absolutely,
President
yes.
and regulated, like anything else. That it's maintained and it's clean and it's safe and it's regulated. I think we've opened up the door for many of these restaurants to grow and it's. It's New York. People want to be outside. I think there's an opportunity to take advantage of public plazas in this. We have one right outside our offices, the Lou Gehrig Plaza. The city put $50 million into that. Yep. Wouldn't it be nice to energize and create something special?
And I have to tell you, the restaurants down on 161st Street, of course, the delis and things like that. Borough President, you mentioned about Orchard Beach. There has been talk about a ferry stop at City Island. You like that idea? Is that one of the things that, especially if we're talking about tourism, bring people from elsewhere to take a walk in City Island? I mean, so you vote yes.
Absolutely, sure. I look at it from a couple of fronts. I look at it in terms of boosting tourism, getting residents around the Bronx. I look at it as a transportation alternative. Ferry service is popular by many New Yorkers, and we've been blessed with sites at Soundview and at Ferry Point Park. We're also talking about ferry service along the Harlem River, because from Roberto Clemente State Park to River Park Towers, the entire West Bronx corridor going all the way up to Marble Hill is going to see an incredible amount of new housing, the Hip Hop Museum, as well as the L&M project. So we've been talking to residents and business and civic leaders on City Island, and it's either City Island, Orchard Beach. So you talk to some, they like City Island, some like Orchard Beach. But definitely one of those locations is very ideal for ferry service.
You know, I've had this idea, and frankly, I sat at some meetings on City Island about it, about getting a trolley so that we don't get stuck in traffic coming down Pelham Parkway. We get a trolley from Orchard Beach. You're clapping, you like it?
We have a trolley.
I know, but we want to get it so that people can
Yes.
park in Orchard Beach, and on a Saturday night just
Absolutely.
take the trolley in.
I
You
like
can
the
use it.
idea.
You like? Oh,
So
there
the
you go.
trolley died and we resurrected it. We believe in the resurrection.
All right, there you go.
So it's back, and we're working on getting it up and running, and a site,
It's on its
storage.
way. It's on its way.
Absolutely.
It's on
Yes,
its
it's
way.
coming.
Good. That's good to know. Mr. Walsh, let's just get back to the jobs thing.
Yeah.
One of the real generators and developers of jobs are community centers, and we have, of course, wonderful community centers. Somebody mentioned to me that Kingsbridge Heights Community Center needs $5 million for a roof. You know, if they don't do well, all those kids and families that come into the programs, that come into, you know, vocational programs, to training programs, and of course, what we need to give our kids productive activities, is that the kind of thing that either of you or both of you could get involved with? Not necessarily in that project, although that would be
We
interesting.
can, working with the Department of Labor, the state. We have state representatives in our office on workforce. It's something we also could be working with community colleges. You know, you talk about sort of the labor pieces. You also think about life sciences and health services. You know, I always remember going to Hostos Community College when the chancellor was the president there. And I was overseeing the workforce programs for the city. He says, "I got to show you something." And he opens the door and he said, "This is our public health center, and we serve the South Bronx. Now take that model and think about that from a labor standpoint, and think about
Well,
that."
this is why I brought it up.
You know, think about that from a community college perspective as a start. Bronx Community College, Hostos Community College, other places where we can get a program going. Unfortunately, you know, we haven't gotten good traction on those types of workforce
And this
programs.
is something you are going to attend to, I
I'm-
presume. You know, my alma mater, and apparently Mr. Rogers' alma mater, Lehman College, is putting a nursing building, and on this day and age, boy, oh boy, I think we all understand the importance of our nurses.
It makes sense.
We'll start with you, Mr. Roger, then we'll go back the other way. What about bids? Business improvement districts, are they doing well? Do you feel comfortable about where we're at? I think Castle Hill is getting one soon, which is wonderful. Do you see that as a growing concept, one that can spread to even more neighborhoods?
Yes, what they do is they support and they give advocacy to those small businesses that would not normally get it. So when you look at what they do to support the small businesses around them, they also generate jobs. They also generate income for the areas around them. They create safe streets, more people out. It generates a sense of community.
Do you look at, we're almost out of time, which is hard because we could do this for hours, I'm sure. Are you looking at other neighborhoods now? And Rob Walsh is really the guy I should ask this question. 'Cause he's really
We are.
But do you see it as an expanding concept, that there are more neighborhoods that could use a business improvement district?
We have a big map in our office, and we literally stare at the map going,
Where do we do that? Rob, what's your thought about
Yeah,
it?
it starts with quality of life. You know, neighborhoods want cleaner and safer streets, and that's why many of the bids began. And it's now, as Rafael said, a place to problem solve. Rafael was in, Arthur Avenue last night, sitting around the table with a number of people problem solving. It is a brilliant concept that should be expanded.
As difficult as it can be for a business to say, well, wait a minute, I've got to pay for it. but they get back.
Yeah,
in the
I
long
mean,
run.
I'm bullish about it. And you know, we have one right outside our door at 161st Street. They just got a $100,000 grant. My hope is they do an even better job cleaning the streets and making it safer, and working with the Yankees and working with other anchors to make this neighborhood even better.
Madam Borough President, we'll let you get the final word out of all of this. The question I want to ask, you went through when you were a council member the rezoning on Jerome Avenue, and I believe I've already asked you the question in a previous program about, you know, how do you view it? The mayor came out talking about, we are the city of yes. You put out a rezoning, I'm going to want a rezoning. We had certainly frankly, an ugly dialogue in the East Bronx about some rezonings, and it got rather contentious. How do you see that as, or do you see that as part of this process to help develop and transform our communities?
Absolutely. If we are a city of yes, then we have to make the process better. We have to make sure we're more efficient from city agencies, and we really are working together in a collaborative way. Rezonings to me are neighborhood plans, and you have to include the neighborhood. You have to include the residents, the faith, clergy leaders, the CBOs, everyone that's a part of it.
And you think that's what wasn't fully done when you were working, you were kind of the tail trying to wag the dog?
Every neighborhood plan can always be better, but I also think every neighborhood has to do its fair share. It is unacceptable that the same neighborhoods continue to absorb and are saturated with affordable housing. And we cannot have a city of yes if the same neighborhoods are shouldering the burden of a citywide crisis when it comes to housing, when it comes to dealing with poverty, healthcare, access to community services like community centers and enrichment centers and recreation centers. Everyone has to be a part of these conversations. But the city also has to say, as we build housing, we need to open more schools, we need to build more parks, we need to add more cops to the local precinct, more nurses to the local hospital. It has to be a neighborhood plan for the entire neighborhood.
I think the P word, the plan word, is a very important one. And I remember
plan with a purpose.
You and I have had this dialogue way back when we were doing that we need to incorporate everybody in the idea, and not only throw up structures, but let's take a look at everything. Rob Walsh, good luck with the BOEDC.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all your help.
Much. Rafael Roger, good luck with the Business Initiative Corporation. And Borough President, you've got a lot of energy.
Good luck with the Bronx.
Good luck with the whole borough. And really, you've got some energetic people here. And
ready to go.
We'll put up the contact info, and everybody reach out. Let's build the Bronx.
Appreciate it.
BBB, Build a Better Bronx. Thank you so much.
I like it.
Thank you.
All right, we also want to thank our producer is Rebecca Hemick, our director is Nick Marrero. Thanks to the cast of thousands who are here working with us in the studio.